He was cursed. Fenya Duskpetal, the Barren Omega of the Thornvale pack, was less than the snow that melted beneath the Alpha's boots. When her womb refused to quicken, when the healers declared her incapable of bearing children, the pack's mockery became the only sound she knew. They branded her empty, leaving a permanent mark of shame burned into her soul. Cast out into the merciless winter. Freezing and alone, she stumbled upon a crumbling stone sanctuary in the heart of the frostbite wastelands. But she wasn't alone for long. 19 pairs of agonized golden eyes watched her from the shadows of the blizzard. They were strays, wounded, just as broken and abandoned as she was. She had a choice. Save what little warmth was left for herself or save the beasts who might devour her before dawn. The great hall of the Thornvale pack smelled of roasted venison, winter pine, and the acrid, unmistakable scent of cruelty. It was the perfume of hierarchy. For Fenya, it was the only air she had ever truly breathed. She moved along the edges of the hall, a shadow in a threadbare cream dress, refilling the goblets of warriors who never acknowledged her existence. Her hair, a pale silver white, was woven into an intricate side braid, and her violet eyes were fixed on the stone floor. To be an Omega in the Thornvale pack was to be invisible, a servant by birth, existing only to appease the bloodline. But to be a Barren Omega was to be something worse. A walking curse, a constant reminder of failure in a world that worshipped fertility and legacy. Tonight the air was thicker, suffocating with the tense energy of the winter gathering. Alpha Ravik sat on the high-backed Alpha's throne, his broad shoulders draped in wolf pelts, his jaw sharp and unforgiving. He was handsome in a brutal, predatory way, and his dominance radiated through the hall like an oppressive storm. He was 32, and his recent consolidation of power had made him the sole, unchallenged ruler of the pack. At his side, perched on a seat nearly as elevated, was Ceres. She was not his mate, not yet, but she was his chosen. Hailing from the fertile and prestigious Ironwood pack, her value was measured in her bloodline, her beauty a weapon, and her contempt for the lower ranks, especially Fenya, a tangible force that pressed down like a physical weight. Fenya's hands trembled as she refilled Ceres's goblet. Ceres deliberately shifted, causing the dark wine to slosh over Fenya's wrist, staining her pale skin crimson. "Clumsy," Ceres hissed, not bothering to lower her voice. "Barren and useless. I can smell the curse on you from here. Go scrub yourself. You're poisoning my appetite." Laughter rippled through the nearby tables. Fenya bowed her head, murmuring, "Apologies, Luna-to-be." She didn't dare wipe her hand on her dress, instead letting the cold wine drip onto the floor as she backed away, her chest tight with humiliation. "Stop." Alpha Ravik's voice boomed, cutting through the hall's chatter like a blade. A hush fell. Every eye turned. Fenya froze, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird trying to escape its cage. Ravik stared at her, his dark eyes flat and assessing. A slow, cruel smile spread across his face. "Tonight is the winter gathering, the night we honor the goddess's gifts, fertility, strength, lineage. It is custom for the Alpha to address the pack's future first." He stood, the chair scraping loudly against the stone. Ceres watched him with a possessive, triumphant smile. She believed this was her moment of crowning. Ravik descended the dais and walked, not toward Ceres, not toward the assembled warriors, but directly toward Fenya. The pack held its collective breath. Fenya's world shrank to the space between them. She could feel the weight of every gaze, the suffocating press of their judgment. Her throat closed. Ravik stopped a foot in front of her. The hall was silent, waiting. His expression was one of cold, clinical disgust, as though he were examining a diseased animal. "This," he said, his voice dripping with venom, "is what the goddess has cursed us with." He grabbed her arm, yanking her forward into the center of the hall. She stumbled, nearly falling, but his grip was iron. He forced her to stand before the entire pack, exposed, trembling. "An Omega," he announced, loud enough for every wolf to hear. "Barren. Incapable of bearing even a single pup. The healers have confirmed it. Her womb is dead." Gasps erupted. Ceres's face twisted in disgust. Fenya couldn't breathe. The shame was a living thing, crushing her from the inside out. "No," Ceres shrieked, rising from her seat. "Ravik, send her away. She's a blight. She'll curse the entire pack if she stays." "I know," Ravik said, his voice dangerously calm. He turned to his pack, his arms spread wide. We are wolves of strength. We cull weakness. We do not harbor defects. The old ways are sentimental. The goddess's mercy is a myth. And I will not allow this thing to poison our bloodline any longer. He turned back to Fenya, who was trembling, her vision blurring with unshed tears. The humiliation was a physical weight, pressing her down, suffocating her. I, Alpha Ravik of the Thornveil Pack, he declared, his voice resonating with Alpha authority, formally and publicly cast you out. You are no longer Pack. You are no longer Wolf. You are nothing. He shoved her backward hard. She fell, her hands scraping against the cold stone floor. The wine on her wrist smeared across the ground like blood. Take her to the border, Ravik commanded. 2 warriors stepped forward, grabbing her by the arms. Drag her to the frostbite wastelands. Let the cold claim what the goddess abandoned. Fenya's scream caught in her throat. The pack erupted in howls of approval, a chorus of condemnation. As the warriors dragged her toward the doors, she heard Ravik's final words, spoken with icy finality. If she survives the first night, the goddess herself will be mocking us. But she won't. The Barren never do. The doors slammed shut behind her, and the world became nothing but snow, wind, and the certainty of death. The cold was a living thing, a predator with teeth of ice and claws of wind. Fenya stumbled forward, her bare feet screaming against the frozen ground. Blood left dark crimson trails in the snow behind her, breadcrumbs marking her slow march toward death. The warriors had dragged her to the border and shoved her across the threshold into the frostbite wastelands. They hadn't even given her a cloak. Just her thin cream dress, now soaked through and clinging to her skin like a burial shroud. The blizzard swallowed their mocking laughter within seconds, leaving her alone with the howling wind. She couldn't see more than a few feet ahead. The snow fell in thick, suffocating sheets, each flake a tiny dagger against her exposed skin. Her silver-white braid, once carefully woven, had come loose, whipping across her face and freezing into brittle strands. Keep moving. The thought was instinct primal. If he stopped, she would die. But every step was agony. Her feet were numb now, which was almost worse than the pain. She couldn't feel where she was stepping. Twice she fell into hidden drifts, the snow swallowing her up to her waist. Each time it took longer to drag herself out. This is how it ends. The thought came with strange clarity. Alone. Frozen. Forgotten. She collapsed for the 3rd time, her knees sinking into the snow. The cold was seeping into her bones now, a deadly lullaby promising rest. Her violet eyes fluttered closed. Maybe it would be easier to just stop. Then she heard it. Not a sound but a memory, her mother's voice, soft and urgent, echoing from years past. If you're ever lost in the wasteland, Fenya, follow the black stones. The old healers built sanctuaries in the forgotten places. Look for the standing stones, 3 in a row pointing north. That's where safety lives. Fenya's eyes snapped open. Black stones. She forced herself to look up, squinting through the blizzard. There, barely visible through the snow, 3 dark shapes rising from the white like ancient sentinels. Standing stones. A sob broke from her throat, half relief, half desperation. She crawled. Her legs wouldn't hold her anymore, so she dragged herself forward through the snow, her dress tearing on hidden rocks, her hands going numb. But she moved. She had to move. The standing stones grew larger. Beyond them, half buried in a drift, was a structure, stone walls, a heavy wooden door, a roof sagging under the weight of decades in snow. Her mother's sanctuary. The healer refuge no one remembered. Fenya reached the door and threw her weight against it. It didn't budge. Frozen shut. She slammed her shoulder against it again, screaming with effort, with rage, with the desperate refusal to die nameless in the snow. The door gave way with a groan. She tumbled inside, collapsing onto a floor of cold stone. The wind howled outside, but the walls held. The blizzard couldn't reach her here. Fenya lay there, gasping, shaking violently. She was inside. She was alive. For now. The sanctuary was a tomb of memories. Dust covered everything. The worn stone hearth, the rough-hewn table, the shelves lined with clay jars whose contents had long since turned to powder. But in the corner, wrapped in oilcloth and tucked inside a wooden chest, Fenya found salvation. Dried strips of venison, hard as leather but edible. A small loaf of bread, preserved by salt and thyme. A handful of withered herbs. 3 days' worth of food. Maybe 4 if she rationed carefully. Her hands shook as she gathered kindling from a pile near the hearth. The wood was dry, ancient, left by her mother years ago. She struck flint against steel with numb fingers again and again until finally a spark caught. The fire was pathetic, small, guttering, barely enough to cast shadows, but it was warmth. It was life. Fenya huddled close to the flames, her wet dress steaming, her body racked with violent shivers. She held her bleeding feet toward the heat and tried not to think about infection, about frostbite, about how many ways she could still die in this place. Then she heard it. A howl. Low, agonized, more groan than cry. It came from outside, muffled by the wind but unmistakable. A wolf's howl, but wrong somehow, desperate, intelligent, pleading. Fenya's breath caught. She looked toward the door she'd forced shut against the blizzard. Another howl joined the first. Then another. And another. A chorus of pain, of exhaustion, of creatures at the edge of death. She moved to the small window, scraped away the frost with her palm and looked out into the storm. Her heart stopped. Wolves. Massive, battle-scarred wolves, each one the size of a small bear. They were collapsing in the snow outside her door, their movements slow and faltering. Blood matted their thick gray and white fur. Some limped on 3 legs. Others had deep gashes across their flanks. Their eyes, golden, glowing, impossibly aware, turned toward her window. Fenya counted them as they fell one by one into the snow. 19 dying wolves at her threshold. He should be terrified. They could kill her in seconds if they had the strength. But as she stared into those golden eyes, she didn't see predators. She saw suffering. She saw the same desperate, broken creatures she'd seen in her own reflection. Exiles, abandoned, left to die. Fenya looked back at her meager provisions. 3 days' worth of food. The fire she'd barely managed to kindle. Her own frozen, bleeding body. If she opened that door, if she let them in, she would be sharing everything she had. She would be gambling her survival on creatures who owed her nothing. But if she didn't, she thought of Ravik's final words. Let the cold claim what the goddess abandoned. The pack had cast her out because she was barren, because she couldn't produce. They'd measured her worth by what her body could give and found her worthless. But worth wasn't something you were born with. It was something you chose. Fenya stood, her legs trembling. She walked to the door, placed her hand on the cold wood and pulled it open. The wind roared in. 19 pairs of golden eyes turned toward her, filled with shock, with hope, with desperate, unspoken gratitude. Come inside, Fenya whispered. All of you. They came inside slowly, cautiously, as though they couldn't believe she'd truly opened the door. The largest wolf entered first. A massive creature with fur as black as midnight, crisscrossed with silver scars that spoke of countless battles. He moved with a limp, favoring his right front leg, and his golden eyes never left her face. The others followed, a procession of wounded warriors. They arranged themselves around the small sanctuary, filling every corner, their combined body heat beginning to chase away the deadly cold. But none of them approached the fire. They left that space for her, as though understanding she needed it most. Fenya stared at her provisions. The dried venison. The hard loaf of bread. 3 days' worth of survival, for one. She picked up the hunting knife her mother had left behind and began to cut. 19 strips of meat, each one painfully thin. She divided the bread into 19 equal portions, each piece barely larger than a coin. She laid them out on the stone floor in a careful circle, one portion in front of each wolf. It wasn't enough. It wouldn't fill them. It wouldn't heal them. But it was everything she had, divided equally, offered without reservation. Eat, she whispered. The wolves didn't move at first, as though stunned by the gesture. Then one by one they lowered their massive heads and took the food with surprising gentleness. No fighting. No dominance displays. Just quiet, desperate gratitude. Fenya took her own meager portion and forced herself to chew the tough meat. Then she turned her attention to their wounds. She gathered the clay jars from the shelves, identifying them by faded labels written in her mother's hand. Yarrow for bleeding. Comfort for broken bones. Golden seal for infection. The herbs were old, but they would work. They had to. The black wolf watched as she approached him, her hands filled with dried herbs and strips of cloth torn from the hem of her dress. She knelt beside him and he lowered his head in submission, or perhaps trust. "Let me see," she murmured. His leg was badly wounded. She could see the glint of something embedded in the muscle. Obsidian, sharp and black, radiating an unnatural cold. Poisoned. She'd heard of such weapons, cursed blades used by dark practitioners. Fenya worked carefully, her frozen fingers slowly regaining feeling as she pulled the shard free. The wolf didn't flinch, didn't growl, though she knew the pain must be excruciating. She packed the wound with golden seal paste and wrapped it tightly. "There," she said softly, meeting those impossibly intelligent golden eyes. "You'll heal now." The wolf lowered his head further, pressing his massive forehead against her palm. The gesture was so deliberate, so human in its gratitude, that tears burned Fenya's eyes. "I'll call you Nightshade," she whispered, "for your dark fur and the poison that tried to kill you." She moved to the next wolf, then the next, pulling thorns and shards, cleaning wounds, whispering words of comfort she'd never received herself. Hours passed. The fire burned low. Her hands ached. But she didn't stop until all 19 were tended. When she finally collapsed near the hearth, exhausted beyond measure, the wolves moved closer. They formed a protective circle around her, their combined warmth better than any fire. Nightshade lay nearest, his scarred head resting near her shoulder, his breathing steady and deep. For the first time since her exile, Fenya felt something other than cold. She felt chosen. Dawn broke gray and cold over the frostbite wastelands. Fenya woke to the sound of voices outside, rough, male, edged with cruel anticipation. "Should be frozen solid by now. Ravik said to bring back proof." "What proof?" "Her corpse." "I'm not touching a dead Omega. Just her braid then. That silver hair's distinctive enough." Fenya's eyes snapped open. Her heart lurched into her throat. She recognized that voice. Brannock, Ravik's lieutenant, a wolf who'd once dumped spoiled meat at her feet and laughed when she thanked him anyway. The 19 wolves were already awake, already moving. Nightshade rose silently, his golden eyes fixed on the door. The others followed his lead, arranging themselves with an efficiency that sent chills down Fenya's spine. This wasn't the chaotic scramble of wild animals. This was formation, disciplined, practiced military. 3 wolves positioned themselves directly in front of the door. 5 more formed a second line. The rest created a protective semicircle around Fenya, their bodies angled to both shield her and maintain clear sight lines to the entrance. It was the stance of trained soldiers. The door burst open. Brannock entered first, his hand on his blade, followed by 6 warriors. They were laughing, expecting an easy scavenging mission, perhaps a frozen corpse to mock. They froze. 19 massive wolves stood between them and Fenya, arranged in perfect defensive formation. Their golden eyes blazed with cold, calculated fury. Not a single growl, not a single unnecessary movement. Just lethal, waiting silence. "What the?" Brannock's voice cracked. The largest warrior, a brute named Garrett, drew his sword. "They're just strays. Move." Nightshade's lips pulled back, revealing teeth like daggers. The wolf to his right shifted one paw forward. A small movement, but it rippled through the formation instantly. Every wolf adjusted position with military precision. "They're coordinated," another warrior breathed, his face going pale. "That's not. Strays don't move like that." "I don't care what they are," Brannock snarled, though Fenya could hear the fear beneath his bravado. "The Alpha wants confirmation she's dead. We're not going back empty-handed." He took a step forward. The wolves moved as one. The front line advanced a single, synchronized step, their formation tightening. The message was clear. Come closer and die. Fenya watched from behind the protective wall, her breath caught in her chest. She should be terrified, but instead she felt something else. Awe. These weren't random strays she'd sheltered. These were warriors, soldiers, protectors who'd chosen to defend her. Garrett raised his sword. "On my mark." Nightshade lunged. Not to attack but to demonstrate. He moved with blinding speed, closing the distance to Garrett in a heartbeat, his jaws snapping inches from the warrior's throat. Then he was back in position before Garrett could even swing his blade, the formation reforming seamlessly around him. The display was clear. "We could kill you before you draw breath to scream." Garrett stumbled backward, his sword clattering to the floor. "Brannock, we need to leave. Now." "You coward. Look at them." Garrett's voice rose to a shout. Look at their eyes. Those aren't wild animals, they're thinking, planning. And there are 19 of them. Brannock's jaw worked furiously. His gaze swept over the wolves, then landed on Fenya, visible now between the protective bodies. His eyes widened with recognition, then narrowed with rage. You survived, he spat. The cursed Omega survived. Fenya lifted her chin, finding her voice. Leave. Now. Nightshade growled, a sound that rumbled through the sanctuary like distant thunder. Brannock backed toward the door, his warriors already scrambling outside. Ravik will hear about this. He'll come himself. You and your pets won't survive what's coming. Then tell him to bring his army, Fenya said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. We'll be waiting. Brannock fled. The door slammed shut behind him. The wolves held formation for another moment, then relaxed. Nightshade turned to Fenya, and she could have sworn she saw approval in those ancient, knowing eyes. She wasn't alone anymore. And Ravik would soon learn what that meant. After Brannock's retreat, Fenya couldn't settle. The sanctuary felt smaller now, charged with questions she couldn't answer. Who were these wolves? Why did they move like soldiers? And why had they chosen to protect her, a worthless Barren Omega? She began to search the sanctuary properly, looking for anything her mother might have left behind. The shelves yielded nothing but empty jars and moth-eaten cloth. The table was bare. But as she knelt by the hearth to add wood to the dying fire, her knee pressed against a stone that shifted. Fenya froze. She pushed harder and the stone tilted, revealing a hollow space beneath. Inside, wrapped in oiled leather to protect against moisture, were 3 leather-bound journals. Her mother's journals. Fenya's hands trembled as she opened the first one. The pages were filled with her mother's careful script, observations about herbs, healing techniques, patient notes. But the second journal was different. The writing was urgent, almost frantic, and it spoke of things Fenya had never heard her mother mention. The old magic is returning. The sorceress Vixara has been seen in the Northern Territories, gathering power. The Healer's Council fears she seeks revenge against the royal bloodline for her exile 30 years past. Fenya's breath caught. A sorceress. She turned the page, her heart pounding. Word has reached us through the underground network. Alpha King Valen Moonskar has disappeared. His entire royal guard vanished with him during a diplomatic mission to the border territories. Foul play is suspected. The subordinate alphas are already positioning for power. Without the king, the kingdom will tear itself apart. The words blurred as Fenya read faster, her mind racing. I have learned the truth through a dying messenger who reached the sanctuary. Vixara cursed the king and his guard, trapping them in permanent wolf form. The curse can only be broken by the starfire bloom, a legendary flower that grows at the peak of the Forbidden Spire during the winter solstice. Without it, they will remain wolves until they die, forgotten and lost. Fenya looked up at the 19 wolves arranged around the sanctuary. They were all watching her, their golden eyes fixed on the journal in her hands. Nightshade moved closer, his massive head lowering until he could see the pages. You understand, Fenya whispered. You understand every word I'm reading. Nightshade's eyes closed once, deliberately. A nod. The truth crashed over her like a winter avalanche. These weren't strays. They were the Alpha King's royal guard. And Nightshade, the massive black wolf with the ancient scars, the one who led the others, the one who'd shown her such heartbreaking gratitude, was King Valen Moonskar himself. The ruler of all wolves reduced to this. Poisoned, cursed, betrayed. And Ravik must have been part of it. He'd seized control of the Thornveil pack, consolidated power, eliminated anyone who questioned him. He'd exiled Fenya not just for her barrenness, but because she was inconvenient, expendable, a loose thread he could cut without consequence. But he'd made a mistake. He'd sent her to die in the very place where the cursed king had sought refuge. Fenya turned to the final entry in the journal, her mother's last written words. The starfire bloom blooms only during the winter solstice, when the moon is full and the temperature at the spire's peak drops to deadly cold. The climb is nearly impossible. Many have tried and frozen to death on the ascent. But it is the only cure. The only hope. Fenya looked at the wolves, at the king and his loyal guard who had protected her, who had chosen her when her own pack had thrown her away like refuse. She closed the journal and stood, her decision already made. The winter solstice is 2 days away, she said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. The Forbidden Spire is a day's journey north. I'll need to leave at dawn. Nightshade stood, moving to block her path. His eyes were fierce, protective, forbidding. I know it's dangerous, Fenya said softly. I know I might not come back. But you saved me. You could have let Brannick take me, but you didn't. You chose to protect someone the world called worthless. She placed her hand on Nightshade's scarred head, meeting his gaze without flinching. Tao, let me choose you. The hidden chamber beneath the Thornvale Pack's main hall reeked of dark magic and desperation. Ravik paced like a caged animal, his face twisted with barely contained rage. Across from him, shrouded in shadows that seemed to writhe and breathe, stood Vixara. The sorceress was ancient and terrible, her face a mask of sharp angles and cold beauty. Her eyes glowed with an unnatural violet light, and the temperature in the room dropped with every word she spoke. You promised me they would die, Vixara hissed, her voice like wine through a graveyard. You said the Omega would freeze within hours. You said there was no shelter in the wastelands. There wasn't supposed to be, Ravik snarled. The old healer sanctuaries were abandoned decades ago. How was I supposed to know her cursed mother had maintained one? Your incompetence is staggering. Vixara's form flickered, shadows coiling around her like serpents. Brannick returned with tales of 19 wolves moving in military formation, protecting the girl. Do you understand what that means? Ravik's jaw clenched. It means they're still alive. It means they've found protection, Vixara spat. It means the curse is weakening because someone is caring for them. The magic I wove was designed to isolate them, to ensure they died alone and forgotten in the wilderness. But that Barren Omega is feeding them, tending their wounds, giving them reason to fight. She moved closer, her presence oppressive. If the curse breaks, if King Valen Moonskar returns to his true form, he will know everything. He will know you hired me to curse him. He will know you betrayed him during the peace talks with the Northern Territories. He will know you've been positioning yourself to seize the throne. I know the stakes, Ravik growled. Do you? Vixara's laugh was cruel. High treason. Attempted regicide. Conspiracy against the crown. The sentence is death. Slow, public, agonizing death. They will strip you of your shift and leave you to die as a human in the very wastelands where you sent that girl. Ravik's hands curled into fists. Then we kill her. We kill the Omega and let the wolves starve. It's not that simple anymore, Vixara said, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. The winter solstice is 2 days away. She's discovered the healer journals, and I suspect she knows about the starfire bloom. She knows where it grows and when it blooms. The Forbidden Spire. Ravik's face went pale. She wouldn't. The climb is suicide. She's barren, exiled, left to die. She has nothing to lose and everything to prove. Vixara's eyes blazed. And if she succeeds, if she brings that flower back and breaks my curse, your precious power, your stolen throne, your entire conspiracy will collapse in a single moment of blinding light. Ravik grabbed his cloak from the chair. Then I go to the spire myself. I'll intercept her. I'll kill her before she reaches the summit. You'll take warriors, Vixara commanded. At least 10. The King's Guard, even in wolf form, are formidable. They may follow her. And you? Vixara smiled, a terrible, cold expression that promised death. I will ensure the Omega never leaves that mountain alive. The starfire bloom will remain unpicked, the curse will hold, and King Valen Moonskar will die a forgotten animal in the snow. In the sanctuary, Fenya packed what little she had, strips of dried meat, a water skin, her mother's hunting knife. The wolves watched her with anxious eyes. Nightshade stayed close, his massive body tense, radiating protective fury at the thought of her leaving. I have to go, Fenya said softly, checking the blade's edge. If I don't, you'll die. All of you. She knelt before Nightshade, placing her forehead against his. I'm not worth a king's protection. But you made me feel like I was. Let me return that gift. The black wolf's eyes held hers, ancient, sorrowful, filled with a resignation that broke her heart. He knew the climb might kill her. But he also knew she would go anyway. Because worth wasn't something you were born with. It was something you chose. And Fenya Duskpetal had finally chosen hers. The Forbidden Spire rose from the wasteland like a dagger thrust into the sky, black rock, sheer ice, and death waiting at every handhold. Fenya stood at its base as dawn broke, staring up at the impossible climb ahead. Behind her, barely visible in the pre-dawn darkness, 19 pairs of golden eyes watched from the tree line. She'd begged them to stay at the sanctuary, but they'd followed anyway, keeping their distance, unable to make the climb but unwilling to let her go alone. Nightshade's howl echoed across the wasteland, mournful, proud, a farewell that might be permanent. Fenya began to climb. The first hour was merely brutal. The rock was slick with ice, each handhold a gamble. Her fingers, still damaged from frostbite, screamed in agony. Blood from her reopened cuts froze almost instantly, gluing her hands to the stone. The second hour brought the wind. It howled around the spire with demonic fury, trying to rip her from the cliff face. Twice she pressed herself flat against the rock, eyes squeezed shut, praying to a goddess who'd abandoned her. By the third hour she couldn't feel her hands anymore. She climbed by memory, by instinct, by sheer stubborn refusal to fall. Her mother's voice whispered in her mind, "Barren doesn't mean broken. Empty doesn't mean worthless." She nearly fell at the halfway point. Her foot slipped on black ice, her body swinging out over a drop that would turn her into a crimson smear on the rocks below. She caught herself with her left hand, her shoulders screaming, tendons threatening to tear. She hung there, gasping, sobbing, and then, impossibly, pulled herself back to the cliff face. Not yet. Not when they're counting on me. The storm hit as she entered the final ascent. Ice and snow blasted horizontally, turning the world into white chaos. Fenya couldn't see more than inches ahead. She climbed blind, trusting touch alone, each movement a prayer. Then suddenly the wind stopped. She pulled herself over the final ledge and collapsed onto the summit. The sky above was impossibly clear, stars still visible in the pre-dawn darkness. And there, growing from a crack in the ancient stone, was the starfire bloom. It was more beautiful than any description could capture. The flower glowed with an inner light, its petals shimmering silver and gold, each one traced with veins of pure starlight. The air around it hummed with power, ancient, wild, redemptive magic that made Fenya's skin tingle. She crawled forward on hands and knees, reaching for it with trembling, bloodied fingers. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." Fenya froze. Her blood turned to ice that had nothing to do with the cold. She turned her head slowly. Ravik stood 10 feet away, his sword drawn, flanked by Brannick and 10 warriors. They'd climbed from the opposite side, using ropes and proper equipment, arriving just as she'd pulled herself onto the summit through sheer will. "The Baron Omega," Ravik said, his voice dripping with mock surprise. "I'm impressed. I didn't think you'd make it past the first ledge." Fenya's hand was inches from the starfire bloom. So close. But Ravik's warriors had arrows nocked, aimed directly at her heart. "Step away from the flower," Ravik commanded, moving closer. "Slowly." "Why?" Fenya's voice was hoarse, broken from screaming against the wind. "Why did you do it? Why betray your king?" Ravik's smile was cruel. "Because power doesn't belong to bloodlines. It belongs to those strong enough to take it." He gestured with his sword. Valen Moonskar was weak. He believed in mercy, in justice, in protecting the defenseless. "He would have made our kingdom soft." "So you cursed him," Fenya whispered. "You hired Vixara to trap him as a wolf so you could steal his throne." "I earned that throne," Ravik snarled. "And I won't let a worthless Baron Omega ruin everything I've built." He raised his sword. "Kill her." The arrows flew. Fenya dove for the starfire bloom, her fingers closing around its stem as the first arrow whistled past her ear. She ripped the flower from the stone, its roots trailing ancient magic, and rolled behind an outcropping of rock. Then the shadows came alive. Vixara materialized from the darkness itself, her form coalescing like smoke given shape. She was terrifying, ageless and cruel, her violet eyes blazing with centuries of hatred. The temperature plummeted. Frost spread across the stone in crystalline patterns from where she stood. "Foolish girl," the sorceress hissed, her voice echoing with unnatural resonance. "Did you truly think you could break my curse? That flower is useless without the proper incantation, without knowledge you don't possess." Ravik lowered his sword slightly, confidence returning. "It's over, Fenya. You climbed all this way to die." But Fenya wasn't looking at them. She was looking past them down the cliff face, where 19 massive forms were cresting the summit. The wolves had climbed. Impossibly against every law of nature, they had followed her up the sheer rock face. Their paws bled, their bodies trembled with exhaustion, but they came anyway, driven by loyalty, by desperation, by something deeper than magic or curse. They came for her. Nightshade led the charge, his scarred body launching from the ledge with devastating precision. The formation was perfect, a coordinated assault that hit Ravok's warriors like an avalanche. Wolves and men collided in a chaos of fangs, steel and screaming. No! Vixara shrieked, shadows exploding outward. Kill them! Kill them all! Ravok lunged for Fenya, his sword aimed at her heart. She had nowhere to run, no way to defend herself. She was going to die on this summit, the starfire bloom clutched uselessly in her hand. Then Nightshade was there, throwing himself between Fenya and the blade. The sword plunged deep into his shoulder. The same shoulder Fenya had healed days ago, now torn open again. Blood, black with curse poison, poured from the wound. No! Fenya screamed. Nightshade collapsed, his golden eyes finding hers. In them she saw no regret, only fierce, unwavering devotion. He had chosen her. And he would die for that choice. Unless. Fenya remembered her mother's words. The starfire bloom doesn't need incantations. It needs sacrifice. It needs love freely given. She crushed the flower in her fist, feeling its petals disintegrate into glowing liquid light. Then she pressed her hand directly into Nightshade's bleeding wound, forcing the flower's essence deep into his cursed flesh. Please, she whispered, tears streaming down her frozen cheeks. Please let this work. He's worth saving. He's worth everything. For a heartbeat nothing happened. Then the world exploded into golden light. The brilliance was blinding, searing, a supernova of pure magic that erupted from Nightshade's body and expanded outward in a shockwave that threw everyone to the ground. Fenya felt the curse shattering, not breaking gently but detonating like chains forged from starlight, suddenly remembering they were meant to be free. The light consumed everything. When it faded, Fenya blinked against the afterimages burned into her vision. Her hand was still pressed against warm flesh, but it wasn't fur anymore. It was skin. Human skin, scarred and battle-hardened. She looked up, and up, into the face of a man. He was towering, easily 6.5 feet tall, with broad shoulders clad in black armor that had materialized with his transformation. His hair was long golden brown falling past his shoulders. His face was carved from granite and warfare, sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw marked with scars and eyes that burned like molten gold. A crown, silver and ancient, rested on his head as though it had never left. Alpha King Valen Moonskar. Around them the other 18 wolves were transforming, their bodies erupting into light and reforming as men, warriors in royal armor, the king's elite guard, each one powerful and lethal. Valen's hand covered Fenya's, still pressed against his wounded shoulder. His voice, when he spoke, was deep and resonant, a king's voice that commanded armies and shook mountains. You saved us, he said, wonder and disbelief warring in his expression. A Barren Omega the world called worthless, you saved the king. Ravok stared in absolute horror, his face draining of all color. The true Alpha King had returned, and there would be a reckoning. Valen stood to his full, imposing height, and the very air around him seemed to bend with authority. His royal guard moved into position, no longer wolves but warriors in gleaming armor, each one a lethal instrument of the crown's justice. Ravok stumbled backward, his sword falling from nerveless fingers. Your Majesty, there's been a terrible misunderstanding. Silence. Valen's voice cut like a blade. The single word carried such absolute command that Ravok's mouth snapped shut involuntarily. You will speak only to confess your crimes or you will not speak at all. 2 of the guards seized Ravok, forcing him to his knees. Brannock and the surviving warriors had already thrown down their weapons, prostrating themselves on the frozen stone. Valen turned his golden gaze to Vixara. The sorceress had gone utterly still, her violet eyes wide with something Fenya had never expected to see in them, fear. You dare show yourself before your king, Valen said, his voice dropping to a deadly calm. After your exile. After your oath never to practice dark magic again. I was hired, Vixara started. By him. Valen gestured to Ravik without looking away from the sorceress. You conspired to curse me and my guard, to trap us as beasts, to leave the kingdom without its rightful ruler so this traitor could seize power. One of the guards stepped forward, pulling enchanted iron chains from his pack, black metal inscribed with runes that glowed with binding magic. The moment they touched Vixara's wrists, her power guttered like a candle in a storm. She collapsed, suddenly frail and mortal. You will be imprisoned in the deep vault, Valen pronounced, where the iron will drain your magic for the rest of your unnatural life. You will never again feel the sun or taste freedom. Vixara screamed, a sound of pure rage and despair, as two guards dragged her away from the summit's edge. Valen turned to Ravik. The fallen Alpha was trembling now, his earlier arrogance completely shattered. I, Alpha King Valen Moonskar, ruler of all wolf territories under the goddess's domain, do hereby charge you with high treason, attempted regicide, conspiracy against the crown and abuse of power. Each word fell like a hammer blow. The sentence for these crimes is death. Ravik went white. Please, your majesty, mercy. You showed no mercy to the Omega you exiled to die, Valen said coldly. You showed no mercy when you hired a dark sorceress to curse your king. You showed no mercy when you tried to murder the woman who saved us. He leaned down, his face inches from Ravik's. But I am not you. I will not grant you the clean death of execution. Valen straightened, his voice ringing across the summit. I strip you of your alpha status. I strip you of your pack bonds. I strip you of your right to shift. You will live as a rogue, powerless, packless, homeless, wandering the territories you once ruled, a warning to all who would betray their king. The magic in Valen's words was tangible. Ravik screamed as something fundamental was torn from his soul. His alpha power, his connection to his wolf, everything that had defined him. When the magic released him, he collapsed, gasping and broken. Take him to the border, Valen commanded. If he ever sets foot in pack territory again, he is to be killed on sight. The guards dragged Ravik away. His screams echoed down the mountain. 3 days later, Valen led his guard and Fenya back to the Thornveil pack. Word of the king's return had traveled fast. The entire pack was assembled in the square, kneeling in the snow, their heads bowed in terrified submission. Saris was among them, her beautiful face streaked with tears. Your Majesty, please, we didn't know, Ravik deceived us all. You knew enough, Valen said, his voice carrying across the silent square. You knew this Omega was called barren and worthless. You knew she was exiled to die. And not one of you spoke against it. The pack trembled. Valen's gaze swept over them, not with mercy, but with the cold assessment of a king who had seen his subjects' true nature. You will answer for your cruelty, he said. But first you will answer to her. He turned, extending his hand to Fenya. She stood beside the king, no longer invisible, no longer nothing. And the pack that had cast her out finally understood what they had lost. Valen stood before the kneeling pack, his presence commanding absolute silence. Fenya remained at his side, still dressed in her torn and blood-stained dress, her silver-white braid now loose and tangled. She looked nothing like a queen, and yet the king would not release her hand. This pack worships bloodlines, Valen began, his voice carrying across the square. You measure worth by fertility, by the ability to produce heirs, by the purity of lineage. You called this woman barren, cursed, worthless. The pack flinched at his words. You are the cursed ones, Valen said, his golden eyes blazing. You are cursed with blindness. You cannot see strength when it stands before you. You cannot recognize a queen when she walks among you. He turned to Fenya, and something in his fierce expression softened. I too was told I could never bond again. 15 years ago, I lost my fated mate to illness before we could complete the mating rite. The healers said the broken bond had damaged my soul, that I would rule alone, that destiny had abandoned me. Fenya's breath caught. She hadn't known. The great Alpha King, alone, broken, bonded just like her. I believed them, Valen continued, his voice dropping but losing none of its power. I believed I was meant to be solitary. Until a barren Omega fed me when I was starving. Until she tended my wounds when I was dying. Until she climbed an impossible mountain and shattered a curse to save wolves she barely knew. He released her hand, and before the entire assembled pack the Alpha King knelt. The gesture sent shockwaves through the crowd. Kings did not kneel. Kings did not bow. But Valen knelt before Fenya as though she were the sun, and he was merely grateful to feel her warmth. Fenya Dusk Petal, he said, looking up at her with those impossibly golden eyes. You are the bravest soul I have ever known. You have a queen's heart, fierce, compassionate, unwilling to abandon those who need you. I don't ask this because of fate or destiny. I ask because I choose you. Tears streamed down Fenya's face. She couldn't speak. Couldn't breathe. Will you be my chosen Luna Queen? Valen asked. A bond forged not by the goddess's decree but by our own free will? A partnership built on sacrifice, courage and choice. The world seemed to hold its breath. Fenya dropped to her knees before him, her hands trembling as she reached for his face. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I choose you. I choose this. Valen pulled her into his arms, and the kiss they shared was witnessed by every wolf in the Thornveil pack. A kiss that sealed a bond deeper than fate, stronger than destiny. When they finally broke apart, Valen stood, bringing Fenya with him. He turned to address the pack, his arm around her waist, anchoring her to his side. Fenya Dusk Petal is your new alpha, he declared. She will rule the Thornveil pack with my full authority and protection. Any wolf who questions her, disrespects her, or refuses her commands will answer to me personally. He gestured to one of his royal guard, a kind-faced warrior named Barren who had defended Fenya fiercely during the battle on the spire. Barren will serve as her beta, ensuring justice and order are restored to this broken pack. Valen's voice rose, carrying to every corner of the square. Let it be known across all territories, barrenness is not a curse. A queen is not measured by her womb, but by the strength of her heart, the courage of her convictions, and the compassion she shows to those the world has cast aside. He looked down at Fenya, his expression fierce and proud. This woman is worth more than every fertile wolf in this pack combined. And I will spend the rest of my life proving it to her. The pack bowed, not in terror now but in genuine submission, in awe, in the beginning of understanding. Saris was weeping openly, her face buried in her hands. Fenya looked out over the pack that had tormented her, exiled her, left her to die. He should hate them. She should want revenge. But she was a healer's daughter. And healers understood that broken things could be mended if someone was willing to do the work. Rise, Fenya said, her voice stronger than she'd ever heard it. All of you rise. The pack obeyed their new alpha. And Fenya Dusk Petal, the Barren Omega who fed 19 stray wolves, finally understood what the goddess had known all along. Worth was never something you were given. It was something you chose. And she had chosen to be worthy of a king.